Estamos de vuelta. We are back. We had, as we know, Champions League midweek, Tuesday and Wednesday. Those teams that played on Wednesday last week, they get to play on Tuesday. And those teams that play on Tuesday last week, they get on played on Wednesday. And that's how the Champions League works when it comes to the playoffs and when it comes to the league form and when it comes now to the round of 16. But we are back and we'll be solely focusing again on the midweek action of the Champions League. Champions League. It gave surprises. It gave high scores in the aggregate score between two teams, of course. But surprises, shocks, dominance, and for those that already knew some teams were gonna pass, some teams passed. But the shocks and the surprises were is one of the reasons why we watch this sport. Is one of the reasons why we follow the sport, and it's one of the reasons why we love this sport. And like Patrice Evra says, I love this game. Love it. Love it. I'm used every time. Football has been changing. Football has changed. But this Champions League shows the quality of the identity of each of those clubs and their nations. Remember, Champions League represents the highest clubs and the reigning clubs of each of the European leagues that have these clubs participating in European football, in the Champions League, in the Europa League, in the Conference League. They're top five, top six, seven teams that qualify to each of these tournaments, showcasing their football and their identity of how their football is playing in each of those nations that is lucky enough to have a club representing them in the European tournaments, like again Champions League, Europa League, and Conference League. But this Champions League, it was the Champions League second leg playoff. So this decided who went through to the round of 16. And again, this Champions League gave gave what we know as surprises, shocks, and of course, we had teams that some of us knew that they were going to go through and they were going to secure their spot to the round of 16. But this Champions League just had a lot of goals, and this Champions League playoff had shocks. But we're gonna dive into this, and for those that don't know, esto es Pase Ambidiestro, Ambidextrous Pass, Fútbol Honestamente, Soccer, Football Honestly. And we're gonna go straight into this Champions League. We're gonna start from the first game that took place on Tuesday to, of course, the last game that took place on Wednesday. But we're gonna start with a game that it was Atletico Madrid against Club Brugge, a game that ended up tied in the first leg. And in the second leg, Atletico went and solved the situation they faced in the first leg. But in this second leg game, Atletico won 4-1. The aggregate score was 7-4. And in this one, Alexander Sorthlos delivered masterclass clinical finishing to ensure that Diego Simeone's side, Atletico Madrid, side just they were able to cruise into the next round after a high scoring first leg. In the first leg, they had 6 goals, 3-3. But this one, Atletico solves and they are through Sorlo's hat trick makes him the first Atletico player to score three in a Champions League knockout game since 2014. Makes him the first Atletico player to score a hat trick in a UCL knockout game since 2014. If I'm not wrong, Mandzukic was the last man to do this. But Atletico are through after a 7-4 aggregate score and tying the first game. Atletico is through. Then we have a Newcastle against a Karabag, a game that ended 3-2, and the aggregate score was 9-3. Newcastle dominated in the first leg. Uh, they went home with a 6-1, which pretty good, pretty decent, comfortable. And in this game, Newcastle finished the job at St. James Park after a dominant first leg away, of course, like we said. While Karabakh fought bravely to keep, their scoreline respectable, but the Magpies' quality was evident throughout the whole game, and they did what they had to do, which is score a few, defend more, and control the game, and they backed this one with an aggregate score of 9-3. And Newcastle's 9 aggregate goals are the highest for any team in a single two-leg knockout tie this season. So at the moment, they hold this record of scoring the most goals in a two-leg knockout tie this season. Newcastle is through. Newcastle dominated their opponent, Karabag, Karabag's home. And then Newcastle went to St. James Park and they just responded accordingly to the amount of goals Karabag was scoring. But Newcastle is through. Then we move on to a Bayern Leverkusen against an Olympiacos. A game that ended up 0-0. A game that on the aggregate score, Olympiacos won 2-0. But this one stayed as a tie as Bayern Leverkusen played at home. Leverkusen played a controlled risk averse game to protect their two-goal lead from their first leg. And Olympiacos failed to make more from this game as the German side suffocated the match. They played, they were staying organized and they were not letting Olympiacos be to make sure Olympiacos was able to get at least one in the net and get hopes of reaching the round of 16. But Leverkusen kept their fifth clean sheet of the European campaign, highlighting their defensive solidity heading into the last 16, into the round of 16. So a Bayern Leverkusen that is showing that they are defensively stable. Uh, 5 clean sheets in the Champions League. First, in the league form, you have 8 games, and then you go to the playoffs. You have 2 games. That's a total of 10 games. You technically have half of your games are clean sheets. So that's pretty good for Bayern Leverkusen. A steady defense. Now they are into the round of 16. Then moving on, we have a game that it left me shocked. I was shocked. But things like this in football happen. And this game was a Inter Milan against a Bodø Glimt. A game that ended in favor of Bodø Glimt, winning as visitors 2-1. And a game that in the aggregate score, it was 5-2 in favor of Bodø Glimt. This was the biggest upset of the round. We saw the Norwegian champions Bodø Glimt eliminate Inter Milan, a respectful, legendary, known club around Europe and in the world. And they eliminated Inter Milan at San Siro in their own home, which, yes, it happens. But this Inter Milan last year reached the final to the Champions League, and this year in the playoffs they are booted out. So there is some type of questions going on in this club. But Inter's defensive lapses were ruthlessly exploited by the visitors on their counter-attacking style, and not trying to blame players, but Akanji made a mistake that made him paid, and the game just got thrown away. It hits you emotionally. You gotta keep trying. You gotta keep pushing. But when the adversary is organized well, moving well, defending well, the job just gets harder. You have to keep trying. Of course, it's 90 minutes. Anything can happen. But that one mistake just solidified the game for Bodø Glimt. And Bodø Glimt is through, a Norwegian club that surprises Inter Milan, one of the European giants. Bodø Glimt, a team that is known now, but looking at history, comparing the two clubs statistically and by name and by being known, everybody knows Inter Milan. And I'm not trying to compare, but that's just the truth. Everybody knows Inter Milan, the players that have gone through Inter Milan, the players that have played for Inter Milan, and that's one of the reasons why Inter Milan is known, because of their players, their history, the legendary status. But in this one, Inter Milan has been kicked out. They have been eliminated by the Norwegian champions Bodø Glimt, who exploited their defensive lapses. And in this result marks Inter Milan's earliest exit from the competition in 4 years, leading to immediate pressure on the management. And Inter, the first game, yes, you can talk about synthetic grass, or you could say turf, or fake grass, whatever you want to call it. But Inter just didn't seem from the first leg game to have that urgency of trying to take the game, of trying to dictate the game in their favor. They didn't have that urgency of playing physically, making the opponent more uncomfortable. And Inter is a world class club, but as of lately, there's something about this team missing that urgency again. That urgency they should transmit in important games. There's that urgency to transmit in important games, and more when you're playing technically a playoff to qualify to the next round. Last year's UCL final, we did not see the urgency to challenge more than what they could against PSG, as we all remember. They got outplayed. Um, this playoffs they got outplayed again. They got outplayed in the final against PSG, and in this playoff they got outplayed. Something that Thierry has said, and I do agree with this, is truthful. Is we talk about money, we talk about names, but nothing can beat a team. If you have a team, you can cause problems. If you don't have that, I don't care about the money. I agree with that. I agree with that. Uh, you want to attract players that they see a project grow. More these big clubs. The money is there for these big clubs. But you will not attract players if you don't have a project going on, or at least showing signs of a project being built. And in this case, you can say that Bodø Glimt had a team. Inter has the money, but doesn't feel like they have the team at the moment since last year's UCL final. And a team with the need of wanting, or a team just a team, the players wanting and the passion, that can go pretty far. Those things will drive you. Titles is something you want, and plus the passion, those two things connect in a big club and clubs in general, to go far. Those things will connect you to go pretty far. But in today's game, in today's as we know, football, soccer. Personally, I see some, not a lot, but some mediocre players, and that might sound harsh, but it's true, and in many different ways, in many different ways. But one of them is some players reach the professional level and they don't try, or sometimes it seems like they don't try to get better. You are already at a professional level. From that point on, nothing can hold you back to get better. You have all the sources to get better. You have all the outlets to get better, to put more time. If you're a defender and learning a better technique to hold back the forwards, if you're a midfielder, better vision, better distribution. If you're forward, you can literally enhance your game by better finishing, stronger body position, better posture, things like this. But there is that mediocre player of, once they reach the professional level, they don't try to better their game. And that's understandable. In this case, I don't think it applies to Inter, but it applies to Inter in a sense of these players need to give more. The coach needs to ask for more. This is a world class club. This is a club that has won many times this competition. But now they see themselves out of the competition. And I believe this is not the best team Inter has had, but is the best they have had in the last few years. There's just a sense of urgency, physicality, or domination to take the game and dictate the game in their favor. But on Glimt gives the best, does the best, and they take this one and they move on to the round of 16. Inter Milan is the shock of this Champions League playoff. They will not be playing any more European football. At the moment in the Serie A, they have first place. They are leading by 10 points. So, more likely 70, 80, 90%, they will be in Champions League next year. But for now, the competition has been cut short for a legendary club like Inter. Moving on, we have a Atalanta against a Borussia Dortmund. A game that ended 4-1, 4-1, and in the aggregate score was 4-3. Dortmund won at home 2-0, but then Atalanta came to their home and they were able to pull it off to overturn a 2-0 lead in favor of Dortmund. Atalanta put off the comeback of the round, overturning the 2-0 first leg deficit. A relentless attacking performance in Bergamo overwhelmed the German side, and who struggled to contain Atalanta's high press. Atalanta was not letting Dortmund have this game. They were trying and they tried to make sure that they took a piece and they ended up taking the whole thing to be able to move into the round of 16. Dortmund's exit marks the first time they have failed to reach the round of 16 since 2021-2022 season. In this one, we see a game that's totally flipped. Borussia Dortmund has the advantage of 2 goals, but then once Atalanta goes to Bergamo, Atalanta fully flips it 4-1, aggregate 4-3. Atalanta goes through to the round of 16. Moving on, we had a game that for Juventus fans, it put their hopes up. It felt like they were living, and then it felt like they weren't. Really, really tough game. Emotions high, low, nothing in the middle. Everything was high or low. High emotions or low emotions. In this game, Juventus wins 3-2 against Galatasaray. But in the aggregate score, Galatasaray wins 7-5 against Juventus. A first leg game that ended 5-2. And then a second leg game that ends 3-2. But all in favor of Galatasaray to take it and move on 7-5 in the aggregate score. In a chaotic encounter, 10-man Juventus remarkably erased a 3-goal aggregate deficit to force extra time. However, the Turkish side capitalized on their numerical advantage during the additional 30 minutes to advance. And Juventus defender Lloyd Kelly was sent off in the 48th minute, a turning point that eventually sapped the Italian side's energy in the extra time. And a McKennie that this guy has been playing great. An American USA player. This guy has been playing for Juventus amazing. He has been stepping up. He's a midfielder, which now we can see in the past 8 games for Juventus has made that transition to playing forward. Still helping, but mostly attacking and getting goals, getting decisive goals or goals to make Juventus comfortable. And he has been helping, he has been contributing in his midfield work ethic, getting balls, pushing forward, getting back. But he has been contributing in the goals. He has been fighting, he has been scoring, and he has been giving a great work rate for Juventus. And in this game, he did the same to give them hope, scoring the last goal for Juventus to bring it up to a 5-5. But Galatasaray sealed it in the overtime with the goal from Osimhen and Yilmaz. In the overtime, Galatasaray sealed it and they move on to the round of 16. And Juventus, another Italian club, another world-class club that has been pushed out of the Champions League. And this specific team, Juventus, and this Champions League playoff, both games they got a red. Both games they wounded themselves. In the first game, you're done. You got the second one coming on. But then in the second leg, in the 48th minute, beginning of the first half, one of your players is given a red. Your whole game just went one side and you are technically out of the game. Juventus show, grit. They fought. But in the long run, due to only having 10 men, the team that had the most and had the advantage of having more men in the field ended up taking the win. Galatasaray moves on. Juventus doesn't see European football no more, just like Inter Milan. But moving on, we have a Paris Saint-Germain, a PSG, against their neighbors Monaco. And in this game, the first leg was 3-2, and the second leg game is 2-2 on aggregate. The score on aggregate, this game ended 5-4 in favor of PSG. A PSG that moves on to the round of 16. And in an all French clash, PSG survived a spirited Monaco fight back. Monaco that pushed hard despite being reduced to 10 men. But PSG individual brilliance in the second half ensured their progression to the round of 16. Monaco defender Thilo Kerr was sent off, significantly hindering Monaco's ability to protect their first half lead. They took the lead, but due to a man being red carded, another game where you are competing, but you won yourself, and you got another option but to keep pushing and hope for the best and rely on your momentum or whatever momentum you can really find. But a PSG that I believe that I don't know if it's the injuries, I don't know if it's the the managerial body or the players, but personally I see this PSG kind of plummeting at the moment from where they were to where they are. This PSG has been on a decay lately. Can they get back there? Yes, they still have all the players, but there's something they are missing, and they are missing something along the lines when missing for this PSG to be where they were last year to win everything they won. And yes, season is not done, but tracking them, following them, and seeing what they were last year to where they are now, it feels like they have been plummeting little by little, not at a drastic measure, but they have not given their best football of lately. They have not given their best of football lately. But PSG has their talent, has their great individual brilliance, and at the same time has that unity as a team. And this is one of the reasons why last year they were able to win the Champions League. They are the defending champions at the moment, and they move on into the round of 16. PSG is in the round of 16. And then finally, we have the last game of this Champions League round of 16, which is Real Madrid against Benfica, a game that ended up 2-1 for Real Madrid at home. And on the aggregate score, it was 3-1. Real Madrid managed a professional, if unspectacular, victory at the Bernabeu despite the early scares from Benfica. The reigning Spanish champions, they dominated possession and clinical finishing, saw them through. A Real Madrid that started losing, and it was not that convincing. I've been tracking this Real Madrid for so long, and so one thing I noticed about this Real Madrid is, from years of watching this team play, there's something about this team getting scored on sometimes, and then that's when they wake up. Sometimes that has really caused damage to the team because they don't always end up winning the game. But most of the time, this team sometimes gets scored on, and that's when they wake up. In this game, you could say that. personally, I don't think they were the best. They were not the sharpest playing this game. They were a little bit fragile on the defense, not as steady, not as organized, but they were able to take the win. And at the end of the day, yes, that's what counts. But you cannot always go with that mentality or with that type of set into the game, because you don't know if your opponent will be better than the next one, or even if they are not better than the next one, they can still surprise you. That's the beauty of this sport. They can still surprise you, and you cannot go on to the next game with your guard down or feeling like we got this. In reality, you should always try your best. You should always play at your best. At the beginning, this Real Madrid in this game did not convince me. The first goal for Benfica came, but then Real Madrid answered to Tukamendi with a goal that reminded me to, like Tukamendi said, a Toni Kroos type of shot. And I do agree. It's a Toni Kroos type of shot. And it was a great goal. Real Madrid leveled a 1-1. And then Vinicius came to put the cherry on top and just sealed this game for Real Madrid to move on to the round of 16. And in this game, we have a Asensio that came out on a stretcher. He collided with Camavinga, and he got the worst of the collision, of course. But he has been clear that it was something minor and it was only a scare. So hopefully he is actually good and speedy recovery so he can be back. This Real Madrid, as we saw in this game, not the best game they had. They do win. Wins are the things that matter in this sport. But Real Madrid that, as of lately, if you follow this Real Madrid, you look at this Real Madrid and the players, the squad. This team is not the best defensively. They might try to be organized, but they are not as organized. They are not playing as a team. They have what you call individual talent that answers the games for this Real Madrid. And hey, you know, results are getting done. The results are getting done. You are moving on to competition. You're qualifying for the next round of things. But the team doesn't convince. The team does not convince from what I have been able to see from this Real Madrid and for a lot of other people that have seen from this Real Madrid. One thing we can agree is that this Madrid is not what it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Yes, it's a project they're building up, but they're not as steady, not as organized as some other squads that this Madrid had in the past 3-4 years were. There's a lot of individual spark that solves for this Real Madrid. And at the same time, I believe that the congestion of having not great players, but having players that have a similar position in the field does not help the situation in this team, because you have a Vinicius that I said at the beginning when we started tracking all these La Liga and Champions League. You have a Vinicius that plays on the left wing, and you have an Mbappe that's supposed to be playing number 9, but he opens up to that left wing. Sometimes they are literally 4, 5, 10 feet apart from each other. Then you have Carreras also overloading that side. Then you have the midfield getting themselves in there to open the game or disperse the game in general. But that area gets constantly congested. And one thing we know about Vinicius is that he loves to open to the left wing, cut back in, and try to put the ball in the box. So a natural 9 can go at it. We saw this from this Real Madrid in some of the games that Mbappe did not play. And we see this from this Real Madrid against Benfica. Vini tried to get himself in there to put the ball in the box. So players like Gonzalo Garcia, who's a natural number 9, could get themselves in there for the rebound, for the actual shot, for the take of the whole play. And Mbappe is a great player. Cannot take that away from him. He's a great player. He can also solve you a game individually. You can just put him 1v2, 1v goalkeeper. He will make damage. He will do difference. But Real Madrid at the moment doesn't seem like a steady team. They seem like a squad of stars who is working on a project but don't have steadiness in the defense. In the midfield, and what's holding them is their purely attack. The individual talent of the attack, some individuals in the midfield and some individuals in the defense. And of course, Thibaut Courtois. Thibaut Courtois is one of the major pillars in this team. Real Madrid is set to be thinking already about after 2027. Who are they looking at for Thibaut Courtois to replace him, to come and take that responsibility, a huge, huge responsibility? Thibaut is definitely one of the top 3 best goalkeepers that have played in Real Madrid. He has been decisive in many, many games. But this Real Madrid seems to be solving their issues through individual talent. It doesn't seem steady on the defense, and is constantly relying on a more individual work than as a team work. But Real Madrid moves on. Let's see what they bring onto the round of 16 and if they will be able to move on from the round of 16. But that's all for this Champions League leg. Second leg for this Champions League playoff is done. And all these teams is going to be announced Friday, when these teams are going to be facing their opponents and who are they going to face as their opponent. But now we'll be talking about the opponents for the seeded teams. There's, of course, a chance of there's 2 opponents and of course only one for each of these seeded teams, but there will be a chance of one or the other when they do the raffle, you could say, on Friday. But we have an Arsenal that is a seeded team, of course, and their rivals can be between Atalanta and Bayern Leverkusen. For Bayern Munich, seeded team, their opponents can be Atalanta or Bayern Leverkusen. For Liverpool, it could either be Galatasaray or Atletico de Madrid. For Tottenham, it could be Galatasaray or Atletico de Madrid. For Barcelona, it could be PSG or Newcastle. For Chelsea, it could be PSG or Newcastle. But then we still have a Sporting that their opponent could be a Real Madrid or Bodø Glimt. And then for Manchester City, who's the 8th place of these seeded teams, could have a Real Madrid or a Bodø Glimt. But for the unseeded teams, we have a Real Madrid who can either see a Sporting or Manchester City. We have a PSG who can either have a Barcelona or Chelsea. Then we have a Newcastle who could be a Barcelona or Chelsea. And Atletico de Madrid that might have Liverpool or Tottenham. A Atalanta that might be Arsenal or Bayern. For Bayern Leverkusen, it could be Arsenal or Bayern Munich. For Galatasaray, it could be Liverpool or Tottenham. And for Bodø Glimt, it could be Sporting or Manchester City. And for those that watch, you know, the post match interviews with some of the players, not for nothing, but I believe we're going to see a Real Madrid Manchester City. I believe that we're going to see a Real Madrid Manchester City. It's one of those games that they have turned into a European Clásico, you could say. And I mean, yes, there's always good games when you have such teams go against each other. But you know, you gotta give it rest. I don't know if these things are, these raffles are picked genuinely. Who knows? But once you give too much of the same product and you don't make it as limited, people do tend to not want it as much. And you know, at the end of the day, football, professional football, is something we all consume for those that watch the game. So it's a consumption type of thing. But for this type of games to stay in that hype, you need to limit yourself at least to one or two, the most, a season. Manchester City against a Real Madrid, a Real Madrid against the Liverpool, a Barcelona Manchester City, a Barcelona Liverpool, a Barcelona PSG, a PSG against Manchester City. But when you do these games repeatedly, and when you have a round of 16 where these two teams are going to see each other twice, that's two games. Then if you have of course, if you have the playoffs, or if you have not even the playoffs, if you have the league form, some of these teams might see, themselves with some of these other teams because it's 8 different opponents you're going to face. But by the time you play the round of 16, if you saw them in the playoff in the league form, that's already 3 games you're going to play against that team. So, limited keeps it great, but at the end of the day, organizations will do as they please. But that's just a perspective of mine. But this is all for today. That is the Champions League. That is done. We see a Champions League that is done for now. And we will be seeing the draw on Friday. And a Champions League that the next games will be played in March 9 and March 11. The first leg of the round of 16 will be played March 9 and March 11. And then the second round of 16 will be played on the second leg, will be playing on March 16 and 18. But that's all for today. That's all for this Champions League. Eso es todo por hoy. Eso es todo por esta Champions League. Esto es Pase Ambidiestro, Ambidextrous Pass, Fútbol Honestamente, Soccer, Football Honestly. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Have a good one. Thank you for being with me. Have a great day. Thank you.